There are many different exercises which can all be effective at training each muscle group. However, how do we know how many exercises to implement for a single muscle? Is a single exercise enough, or should we implement multiple exercises for each muscle? Throughout this video, we will try to answer these questions. Before getting into the details, we first need to establish the relationship between the number of exercises performed and the number of sets performed. There is an inverse relationship between how many exercises are performed versus the number of sets performed for each exercise. In simple terms, if we perform more exercises for a muscle group, then we will perform less sets for each exercise. And if we perform fewer exercises, we need to perform more sets to achieve the same weekly volume. For example, let's say a trainee wanted to accumulate 10 total sets as their training volume for the quads in a single training session. If we were to perform only one exercise, let's say back squats, we would need to perform 10 sets of squats. If we were to perform 2 exercises, let's say squats and leg press, then we would need to perform 5 sets for each exercise. And if we were to implement 3 exercises, let's say squats, leg press and leg extensions, then we may perform 3 sets of squats, 3 sets of leg press, and 4 sets of leg extensions. In all cases, we are accumulating 10 total sets, but the distribution of volume is different depending on how many exercises are performed. So how does the number of exercises performed influence hypertrophy? We first need to explore if the number of exercises performed for a muscle group has a direct influence on muscle growth. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any direct evidence comparing a different number of exercises on hypertrophy outcomes under volume-equated conditions. However, as we know, more volume tends to be a primary factor which contributes to our rate of muscle growth, and the number of exercises probably doesn't have a major impact if volume is equated. However, there is likely to be a small potential role that number of exercises plays for hypertrophy outcomes. To understand this, we need to look at indirect data and make some theoretical extrapolations. The first concept to explore is the idea of preferential hypertrophy. This refers to different exercises targeting different fibers of the same general muscle group. We know that some exercises can preferentially hypertrophy certain portions of a muscle, while other exercises may preference a different portion. For example, this study explored muscle activation during different bench press inclination angles. As we can see, it was found that muscle activation of the different pec regions differed between bench press angles. The mid and lower pecs saw the greatest activation with the flat bench press, while the upper pecs saw the greatest activation with a 30-degree incline angle. Furthermore, this thesis explored muscle activation of various different back muscles during different horizontal and vertical pulls. It was found that different exercises preferentially activated different back muscles. As we can see, the mid traps were most active during horizontal rows, like the bent over, inverted and seated rows, while the lats were more active during vertical pulls, like chin-ups and pull-ups. These studies show that different exercises can preferentially target specific fibers of the same general muscle groups. This is likely to result in different hypertrophy outcomes between these different fibers. So it seems that it may be beneficial to implement multiple exercises if the target muscle has different fibers which aren't all maximally recruited from a single movement pattern. The other factor to explore is the idea of regional hypertrophy. This refers to muscle growth at different lengths along the same muscle fiber. This is slightly different to the previous discussion, which was referring to different fibers of the same muscle. With regional hypertrophy, even if 2 exercises recruit the same muscle fibers, it is possible for different portions of these fibers to experience more or less hypertrophy. This has been shown to be influenced by many different factors, including exercise selection. For example, this study compared regional hypertrophy outcomes between Smith machine squats versus leg extensions. Although both exercises resulted in similar overall quad hypertrophy, regional hypertrophy was different in some cases. As we can see, Smith machine squats induce greater hypertrophy of the vastus lateralis at the proximal region, which is the area of the quads closer to the hip, while leg extensions resulted in greater growth at the distal region, the area of the quads closer to the knee. This suggests that different exercises may induce more or less muscle growth at different sites of the same muscle fibers. So implementing more than one exercise for a single muscle group may result in more uniform overall development across the entire span of the muscle over time. So for large muscles with multiple movement roles, it may be beneficial to implement multiple exercises. So it seems that performing more than one exercise for a muscle group may be slightly superior for overall muscle development. However, we still don't know exactly how many exercises should be performed for each individual muscle. The reality is that the exact number of exercises we need to implement is likely to be different for each muscle based on numerous factors. Let's now cover what these are and how they may influence our decision. The first factor to consider is the anatomical structure of the muscle we are training. More specifically, we are referring to the orientation of the muscle fibers. Some muscles have a more uniform structure where all fibers run in the same direction, and therefore all produce the same movement. These muscles probably don't need to be trained with as many exercises, as a single exercise can probably recruit and train all fibers. However, other muscles have fibers which run in different directions, which means different fibers may be more or less active during specific exercises. These muscles may require more exercises to recruit and train all areas of the overall muscle group. For example, the biceps have a very uniform fiber orientation. As we can see, all fibers run directly straight from the origin to insertion attachment sites. So any bicep curl variation will likely train all fibers no matter which variation is performed. However, a muscle like the pecs has a highly variable fiber structure. As we can see, the pec fibers are essentially fan-shaped and span in all different directions. So any single chest exercise probably won't maximally activate all fibers of the chest. Rather, we probably need to implement multiple exercises to maximally stress all fibers. Second, we need to consider the functions of each muscle. This refers to how many movements the muscle produces and how many joints it acts on. Some muscles only produce one or two primary movements and act on a single joint. The muscles which perform fewer functions are probably able to be maximally stressed with fewer exercises. However, other muscles contribute to multiple movements and act on multiple joints. These muscles probably require more exercises to be maximally stressed. For example, the calves primarily act to plantar flex the ankle. They also act to flex the knee, but this is a secondary function. So in this case, any single calf raise variation is probably likely to maximally stress the calf muscles. In opposition, the multiple back muscles have many different functions, acting on multiple different joints. So in this case, we can't hit all back muscles effectively with a single exercise. Rather, we need to implement more exercises to maximally stress all the different individual regions. And the last factor to consider is indirect training. This refers to how much the target muscle is being trained indirectly through other exercises in your training program. Some muscles get lots of indirect training through other exercises, while others don't. This will also be somewhat individual to each lifter's training program, as each trainee implements different exercises. Regardless, the muscles which are significantly trained indirectly probably don't need as many direct exercises to be maximally stressed. However, the muscles which aren't trained significantly through indirect training may need to be trained with more exercises. For example, the various heads of the delts are trained indirectly through almost all upper body exercises. So despite the fact that they have multiple functions, we may only require one or two direct exercises for them to see significant muscle growth. However, the hamstrings are not really trained indirectly through any other exercise, which means we may need more exercises targeting this muscle. Now that we have explored the physiological factors which may influence how many exercises are implemented for each muscle group, we also need to explore the practical considerations. There are two primary practical considerations that may influence our decision. Let's now cover what these are. First is training volume. More specifically, how many total sets a muscle is trained with throughout the week. The amount of volume we train with may determine how many exercises we implement for any given muscle group. Generally, if volume is high, it is more appropriate to perform more exercises for that muscle group. And if volume is lower, it may be more appropriate to select fewer exercises. For example, let's look at 2 different chest training sessions with different volumes. In the first session, the trainee wants to perform 12 sets for the chest, and in the second session, this lifter wants to perform 6 sets. It is probably more appropriate for a lifter to implement 3 to 4 chest exercises for the high volume session, resulting in 3 to 4 sets for each exercise. Whereas the lower volume session can get away with performing 1 to 2 chest exercises. And the other practical consideration is equipment availability. Depending on the gym or home gym you train at, your access to different lifting equipment is likely going to be somewhat limited. The more equipment you have available, the more exercise variations you can implement, and the less equipment you have available, the fewer exercise variations that can be implemented. This means trainees may have a limited number of exercises they can implement for certain muscles throughout the week. Furthermore, it also limits our ability to change exercises when required. If we have chosen multiple exercises and we want to change a movement, we may not have any fresh exercises to implement. However, if your gym has every piece of equipment you will ever need, then you can probably get away with implementing more exercises and still have fresh variations available when an exercise becomes stale. So to summarize this video, let's establish some practical recommendations. From a physiological perspective, it seems that implementing a few different exercises for the same muscle group is probably more beneficial than performing a single exercise. The exact number of exercises for any given muscle will be different based on its anatomical structure, movement functions, and how much indirect training it is subject to. Furthermore, there are practical considerations which may influence our decision, such as how much weekly volume we perform and our access to equipment. So there is no specific answer as to how many exercises we should implement for each muscle. Rather, trainees can use these general guidelines to make their own informed decisions based on their individual circumstances. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Check out flowhighperformance.com for online coaching, training templates, ebooks, and more.